Step right up. Welcome back. Come right in as we enter into the Dungeon Master's Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game, the only person capable of playing God, killing characters, and lowering the egos of all other people at the table. I'm one of your hosts, Dungeon Master Mitch, and that's all of the scary voice that I'm going to do. I slipped into pirate there for a little bit. It sounded weird, but I'm the only one doing the intro for this episode, so it feels extra weird to be doing these silly voices. So, hey, we're here, Dungeon Master's Block, doing a Halloween episode. In this Halloween episode, Neal and I are going to be talking about hunting monsters. That classic Halloween trope, Van Helsing style. It's going to be great. Before we jump into the meat and talk about that in this episode, I have a 5-star review to give a shout out to. This 5-star review comes from Sub to Me on YT, and it's entitled Best D&D Podcast for Narrative Inspiration. There isn't any reason why you shouldn't listen. For players, it's a wellspring of knowledge you can use to metagame your way out of any situation. And for DMs, having a wellspring of brilliant ideas to make any RPG shine with narrative glory and the holiest of narrative progression, character development. And in parentheses, cast suggestion, listen to this podcast. That's a great review. Thanks so much. Sub to me on YT. Appreciate it and appreciate you as a listener. Well, without any further ado, let's jump into the gross, gritty, rotten meat for this Halloween episode.
I'm starving. We ain't had nothing but maggoty bread for 3 stinking days.
Why can't we have some meat?
The flank meat's back on the menu, boys!
Well, as we said, for this segment of the meat, for our Halloween episode, we're talking about hunting for monsters, Van Helsing style. So, Neal, it's us today in the meat section. It's us talking on the shop. And so, Van Helsing style gaming, perfect for Halloween. I guess the first question is, if you're going to have either it be a one-shot or a whole campaign with hunting for monsters, what are some of your thoughts on how you can set that campaign or that one-shot up right?
You really threw me for a loop. Like, I hadn't thought of it as like a one-shot or a campaign. Like, this entire time, for some reason, I had only thought of it like ideas about running a monster hunting style campaign, because I think one of the things for me is deciding what's your bigger monster and letting your, like, the other monsters that you're incorporating be kind of like leading up to it, or some just like side characters or NPCs or things like that. So I think to really hit home on like that whole monster hunting feel, like monsters have to be prevalent in whatever world and setting that you're in. So is it
we're hunting monsters, there's no monsters?
Well, exactly though, but it's not even that there are monsters or that there's like a roving band of trolls just over the next hill, but I think part of it is that they go into like the lore so deeply. Because if you think about like man, like it makes me think that it's like cryptozoology from the 1800s. Like that's kind of that feel that you get, is that there's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and that there's this story, this lore about that scenario and or Dracula, and that this story is hundreds of years old. So I think it's that it has to be really
I get
prevalent.
what you're saying, like, and it's almost like that's a good place to start, is to dive into like the actual folklore of these monsters. Like if we're playing in a Monster Hunter game where all the PCs are these Van Helsing like characters that their purpose is to go around from place to place and kill monsters, like when you brought up trolls, like, where are they going to come across a troll? A troll is going to be they're crossing a bridge and they hear a creepy voice from underneath. And like, to go into the detail of the folklore of the creepiness of that really can build upon the type of game that you're trying to play in.
And the big thing about Van Helsing, and the reason we wanted to frame it, is that historically, and also it's around the same time. So when I did the research, there are several things I did. One is actually watch the Hugh Jackman film. Okay. Not great, but not great as it.
Some people love that movie. Some people are like, it's schmuck, but it's good.
Okay, but that's my thing, is that's a great way to start the conversation about the film, is that one, it is not a pinnacle of cinema. There's just that. But if you're looking at it through the eyes of like a D&D campaign, it is good. It is really on point for like the way the characters are over exaggerated and the way the monsters are.
It's great inspiration.
Yes. Fantastic.
And for a D&D campaign like this, it's good to, like the movie did, lean into it, is what I think you're saying.
Yes. Oh, it leans very well. And some of the stuff that is total, that's what a player would say their character is doing. Where Kate Beckinsale like grabs the rope and literally swings across the chasm, like hundreds and hundreds of foot chasm, as one of the brides of Dracula tries to swoop in and attack her. She slams into the wall, flip flops all down, but it's just like, nah, I'm good. I made my acrobatics check. I'm not dead somehow.
Well, I think that players who are going to be playing in this type of game, they want to play that. Like, a lot of them are probably going to want to play that type of over-the-top character that is like rough around the edges, and they've seen some stuff, right? Like, so taking a nice fall like that, like, they're just going to get up, they're going to brush themselves off and have this pissed off face, like, now that vampire is going to die.
Oh, it's good. But the other thing that's nice is you have a lot of different Helsing style stories, because originally this was 1897 that it was kind of the counterpoint to Dracula and all the iterations that it's taken from there. And I think one of the other big things is about that lore is that oftentimes the Helsing character is one, the original Abraham, like, let's make sure we say that right. The internet will find us. Yes. Abraham Van Helsing was insanely intelligent, like PhDs, metaphysics, all these certain things. And I think that works really well with, again, incorporating that lore. And so then, like, what do they know? What do they not know? Oh, but like, also they can research anything that they want.
Yeah. I like the idea of, like you said, like, it sounds simple, but there have to be monsters, and the lore of those monsters can be really important to it. And you could play a monster hunting type game in just the typical fantasy world. But if you're going to want to make this more than a one-shot, I think leaning into it and having a Ravenloft-like, or just go Ravenloft setting, is something that is fantastic for this style of game. Even if you have your homebrew world and it is more of a typical like fantasy homebrew world, maybe there's a place, a country that has been under a curse, and they are that Ravenloft-like place. That when you go there, having Monster Hunter be like a type of profession, and maybe even a revered profession, is something that is key to that country, and is something that your players can kind of sink their teeth into, pun intended, to kind of drive that story. Maybe there's a guild, a monster hunting guild. Maybe you just create a band of mercenaries that is what they do. They go around from week to week doing the monster of the week hunt. And that can kind of lead up to like a arch enemy that like is the big overarching big bad for the story. And then you can throw in their villains and their little villains, little minions that could be just obstacles to get to that big bad. But that big bad might be whether it's a werewolf or a vampire or a ghost or a dragon or whatever you want, in that type of setting, the monsters might be in charge. Like the humans may be like the more underground, like we have to like live like in secret because monsters are in charge of this land. And if we're found, we're dead and we're going to get eaten. So to this oppressed people, the humans and the dwarves and the gnomes who are like hiding out so that they don't get killed by the powers that be, you could be this underground like heroes and champions that like are going out and seeking to assassinate the powers that be to try to turn back the tide, to push back against the powers of the monsters that are in charge.
I think the other fun thing to do is, if you have this place that is so prevalent with monsters, one version is that you have monster hunters, but you can also have people that just like that they have monsters. Because that's also in the movie, is that the people don't really want someone to go kill the vampire, because as of right now, the vampires only kind of take what they need. They don't really kill everyone. They don't do it like, it's not this wanton destruction. It's just they kill what they need and then they just leave it there. And so a monster hunter coming in, and there's also that D&D trope as well, that some townspeople view adventurers as problems because problems follow adventurers. And it's like the kind of chicken, the egg situation. So it all depends on like how you want monsters and monster hunters to interact with the world.
Yeah, like I'm even thinking about like a city that's ruled by a werewolf lord, and the protection of the city are his werewolf legion. And typically, like the people that they eat are the enemies of this city, and the people within like revere and look up and look to them as like they protect us. Sure, every now and then, like we need to like make a sacrifice or two to keep them so that they can eat. Like, you know, they love their human flesh. But typically when that happens, they choose from the older group in society, and sometimes there's even volunteers. So they're great. We love these guys, and they keep our city in a pretty peaceful place. We're pretty prosperous because of our werewolf overlords.
Yeah, and I think another big piece about this style of play and the monster hunting, I think, is humanizing the monsters to some degree. Because even if one thing that I would say that film did well was you have Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So you still have Dr. Jekyll who's in there. And so, like, if you kill this creature, do you kill both parties? Or you have Frankenstein's monster who is just been made. They've had no say in what their life will be, but everyone says they're a monster and wants to kill them. You have werewolves who oftentimes are someone you know that has been bitten, and then you have that back and forth about, well, what do I do about it? So I think humanizing the monsters to create more lore or even more direct connections to the players, or player characters, makes it even better. Like, I think that's an important piece of this style. So it's not really just a bag of hit points. It's more, because then again, you're just focusing on that lore and ingraining it into everything about it.
Well, even if you can give your monsters aspects, like to them, that they're not all bad. And even that the citizens may actually like the monsters, depending on the situations that we're talking about. One, you may come across a time where your players and as their characters are going, we don't know if we want to actually kill this monster. Or at the very least, you're kind of flipping the tables on them, and they are the monster hunters, but to that society, they are the villains. They might be taking down the vampire lord, but to that society, they are the villains. They may see it as like, no, we're doing this because this just isn't right. Like, we may be in the minority that believes that this is not how a kingdom should be ruled, But everybody doesn't see it that way. And so they're not going to be welcomed at the tavern with open arms. They might even have to kind of disguise themselves and try to really lay low and not be showing off who they are to the rest of the world.
So now part of me is that, so I've watched that movie so recently, part of me wants to try and get away from it, but it just fits so well to a D&D campaign. My other thought is, like, which monsters work well for it? And part of me also thinks, like, what monsters don't? As long as you're kind of keeping to that idea of it really ingraining that lore, both in party and in world, like, there's no monster that doesn't fit. Like,
yeah. You can put twists on certain monsters too.
Yes.
Like you can absolutely have an angel be the monster that is being hunted, especially if you're talking about like a fallen angel, or maybe an angel that is, maybe the god of the angel has died and now they are trying to be the benevolent leader and they are a zealot, so that it's just like, yeah, they're over punishing for crimes. And again, the city might be like zealotous about worshiping that angel, and your party is just going, no, this isn't right. This is how it's done. We need to take this angel out.
Yeah. The idea of the kind of going with the Icarus, the storyline, that way it is truly a fallen angel, and then, like you said, their interactions with other creatures in the world that they're now in just isn't working. Like that's not how they operated thus far. And so then what will the players have to do to resolve that situation?
Ultimately, I think coming back to kind of what the point was that you were getting to at the beginning is that, you may have some really random like encounters in this with monsters in this type of game. You may, like, in your journey to reach a certain destination or to reach a certain character, you may go through a dungeon crawl like scenario where you're killing giant bats that have been infected by vampirism. But I think something that's important to think about in this is that the main monsters are NPCs. They're not just monsters, but they are characters to be given weight behind who they are, why they do the things that they do. I think thinking about them in the sense of they are monstrous NPCs is a much more beneficial way to go in this type of campaign.
Yeah, because one that's not in the film that mainly, again, I'm just trying to get away from the film and think of other ideas was...
You're stuck,
Neil. I can't. It was so... I cannot express enough how close to just D&D on screen that whole thing was. Again, like, not the pinnacle of cinema, because translating your table into a Hollywood film, like, that's usually not how that works. But the idea of the creature of the Black Lagoon, and then also looking at the new Swamp Thing series that was on DC Universe. And the whole Swamp Thing series is that he gives himself to the green and just becomes part of that part of the world. And the things that he's willing to do, I mean, depending on which direction you're looking at it from, I mean, people definitely die at the hands of Swamp Thing, but is it justified because it's trying to save that area? And so that same idea of the creature from the Black Lagoon, is it a Black Lagoon because someone's been like dumping magical waste into it, and now they're doing all these things to try and stop that from happening? And then, like you said, having it be an NPC, and part of it being an NPC is also sometimes just giving that creature a lot of power so that they have the control in those situations to choose to have a conversation instead of just fighting.
Yeah, and it's kind of just leaning into those extremes, like, or even like a reaction to some evil that was done to others or to themselves, that somebody might become a monster, like that Swamp Thing. Swamp Thing is like an extreme version of environmentalism, which is a good thing. But yeah, like there might be this point, there is this point where it's like, what if there's no lines that you're unwilling to cross in that, and that you've been given this power because you are now a creature of nature that poison ivy is very much the same exact kind of way. And I think a lot of monsters can work well that way, like the werewolf example we were talking about, where if you're going by the extreme of protection and protection of your city, you are willing to cross certain lines to get that. If you're thinking about the fallen angel example, and you're talking about extreme zealotous following in a religious sense, if there's no lines that you're unwilling to cross, that creates a monster for your monster hunting party. But let's kind of turn the path a little bit. And since we are talking about monster hunters being the playable characters in this campaign, I thought it'd be a good thing to talk about monster hunter preparation. So whether it's skills or equipment that your monster hunting characters might be equipped with, might have knowledge of. What are your thoughts, Neal? Whether it's from I don't know, a movie that you watched recently, or just other, or just other ideas you have of like, how do you define what a monster hunter is going to have on their person, or that is going to dictate the way that they think?
I think a lot of it made me think of like an 1800s James Bond. That there's this gadgetry, and again, it goes back to the lore of like, why am I using this to combat that? And so am I carrying around a cross, or am I carrying around garlic, or these super weird saws that he uses, or the like crazy crossbow, or so almost a steampunk style, I think is also really helpful to kind of keep, because you can also get a little campy when you approach it from that angle as well. But I think the key to that, whether or not you make it silly, whether or not you make it serious, again, goes back to ingraining that lore and finding out what pieces of the lore work and what pieces don't. Does daylight work? I don't know. Can a vampire see its own reflection? I'm not sure. Like Frankenstein's monster, like, does electricity heal it because you used it against it? I mean, and obviously... The best thing is just have fire, because apparently just fire works when you look at it from those ways. But so my thought is to go steampunk, but what is your thought?
Well, I think steampunk is a good direction to go, especially if you're considering not just monsters in this type of setting, but like mad scientists, monsters that are like a Frankenstein monster, which like golems work really well in that. Flesh golems are horrific when you get into like the imagery of them. Homunculus, those kind of things. I think steampunk works really well in that. But one of the things that I had an idea about was, I think if I was going to run a game like this, I would 100% want a skill that is a knowledge-based skill that was about knowledge about monsters. Because if your characters are monster hunters, like, I would imagine that they would, one, from experience, and two, from study, be learning and retaining all this information about different monsters. Like, Neal, I don't know about you, but when I DM, sometimes it's frustrating when you throw a monster out at your players and you have the metagamey player who is just like, oh, I know this monster, and they like announces to the group, they are weak to this, or this won't work on them. And it's like, but would your character know that? Like, you've kind of just destroyed the whole interesting premise where the other players also may not know that. And I don't want to go on a rant about that, but that can be frustrating as a DM, and like I would be frustrated with that as a player too if another player did that. I think in this campaign there's a way to kind of really encourage, not to say encourage like the metagaming aspect, but like make that into a skill where you roll some sort of knowledge check to be given information, you the DM giving out information to the players about monsters and their weaknesses and their behaviors, and all this different information that might be really helpful to them, because these are the type of characters who that fits really well. That, yeah, you may have never encountered a troll before, but you are prepared in encountering a troll because you've heard of trolls and you want to be prepared in case you run across a troll. And so, yeah, you've heard about their regeneration and you know that fire and acid, and you can kind of give them that with some sort of check. I think that'd be fantastic.
Well, I love it. I think we're going to talk a little insider baseball. I think over time here at the Dungeon Masters Block, we've done less investing beforehand about the ideas that we want to talk about. Like, we've gotten really good about making a succinct outline about what we're going to talk about in an episode. And I think it lends itself really well to being able to play off of each other, because I have so many ideas based off of what you just said.
Give it. Let's
okay,
go.
so one thing is like do a Blades in the Dark style where maybe they have, and I'm going to say it to go full camp. At the beginning of a session, you hand everyone a certain number of bookmarks. And basically, when they want to do a check based on a certain monster, they give it back to you, one of the bookmarks, and you do like that a cutscene of when they were studying.
Oh,
whatever that looks like for that character or for whatever reason or for that monster that they're...
And it doesn't have to be like, oh, you flashback to you reading a book in a library. It certainly can be, but you could flashback to, we're talking about mad scientists, like talking to a mad scientist character who has like different sorts of creatures in cages and is prodding them with sticks and talking to your character. Flashback to another time where you fought that creature or a lesser version of that creature. Like, yeah, those bookmarks are a fantastic way to give those flashbacks, and you could be really, really good at role-playing interesting flashbacks.
Well, yeah, the first one I thought of was you're flashing back and you're a child, and it's a mentor or a parent telling you a story about one of these monsters. The other thing is figuring out what game you have, what dials you can turn. So for 5th edition, just because that's where we're at, and it's certainly what I have the most experience with, even if a player hasn't chosen certain things for their character, you as the DM still have certain options to turn up or down. The biggest ones are proficiency and advantage. So even if I'm not proficient in history, but if I do a history monster check, I could be proficient in that. Or I could have advantage in that. So if it's just a general historical knowledge, I don't know, I didn't read history, I don't care. But when it comes to monsters, that's what I've invested in. Because I think about that in my real life. Like, there are certain things that I know a lot of, but then none of that is transferable to like a broader spectrum of, like, even if you want to say history. So then figuring out what that looks like for, again, the individual characters. Is it because... And does that bookmark? No, the bookmark I'd totally give it for free because that's really fun for me. If you hand in the bookmark, you totally know about that one creature. But if you wanted to take a shot and you didn't have the bookmarks, or you don't like the bookmark idea, again, giving advantage and giving proficiency.
Well, you could make it just a simple knowledge check, and like if you want to, you could have it just give them advantage, like you said. But I'm even thinking about that in the sense of, like, the ranger class has favored enemies. What if for these type of characters you allow each of your players to choose a favored monster type, that when they come across that monster type, maybe they know right away that it is that monster type. Maybe they have to make a check to know that. I'm not sure. I think it would be depending on the different type of monsters. If you are pretty familiar with constructs, I think you'd know what a golem is. But yeah, like, what if each player has made different choices about monsters that they are specialized in? So when they do fight the golem, the player who has chosen constructs, they are going to get that advantage when they roll for that, for knowledge about that type of monster's behaviors or weaknesses. And even maybe you can, throw in a little bit of like, oh, you get just like the ranger class, you get a little bit of a mechanical bonus to harming or to hitting, to finding weak points. Like, that's a cool way to add a little bit of diversity too amongst your group that they need each other for multiple reasons, but they need each other also because they are studied in different types of creatures.
Yeah, that's a really fun, more subtle way of finding out what your characters, and that too, but what your players would like to see in the campaign or the one shot is that you have that session 0, or you have that session, that character, what do I want to say, the character creation process where they've each chosen a type of monster. Obviously, they think that's important, that they would want to see that kind of thing if they want advantage and they want knowledge. And then you can frame what you're building around the idea of those 3, 4, 5 different types of monsters guaranteed to be there. So the again, it's going back to what the player has said that they wanted by making that choice. And also it positively rewards the choice that they've made, because that's one of the tough things about, I made a cleric and I can turn undead and I never see a skeleton. I'm a ranger and I chose a favorite territory and we're on the ocean the whole time. Or like forest is my favorite terrain and we're on the ocean. That kind of thing. It's part of it, but the idea of like tailoring exactly what monsters they want to see.
Well, and if you could even work in some sort of like level progression that like, you start off with that at level 1, and then at level 5, everybody gets to choose another type of monster, or you could choose to double down on the monster of choice that you've already picked. And then when you roll, you could give them some other bonus, whether they're rolling at advantage with 3 D20s and choosing the highest, so that like they're really skilled.
Super advantage.
I know that's not typical 5e rules, but hey, we're not typical here, right? Or you could just say, when you pass those checks, well, I'm going to give you, because you know dragons so well, I'm going to give you more information than I would if somebody else who just had chosen dragon once would be getting. And you could have that happen multiple times, that you could have like a character who is kind of like a maj-podge of they know about vampires, they know about dragons, and they know about undead. Or you could just have one character that is they are all about killing undead. They know so much about undead. They are experts.
Oh man, I would totally make an undead person that was related to them and had some semblance of the old life again, because I feel like that.
Oh man, now I'm just thinking about Walking Dead and a character like that having zombies attached by chains to them, and they're fighting alongside of them. That'd be pretty sweet.
Yep, it's good. Oh,
so I'm gonna kind of take your bookmark idea because I like it a lot, and I'm gonna say there's another thing that you could do here, which leads me into the equipment. Is what if you kind of take this monster knowledge idea and the bookmark idea and double down on it, and you have little, we'll just say little silver bullet cards that each player has, and those cards represent previous becoming prepared for some sort of monster. Because you could just say, all right, guys, you go ahead, go into town, buy up anything that you would want to have as far as protection against certain monsters. Or rather than spending a ton of time on that, maybe each character has 1 or 2 silver bullet cards, and maybe they can refresh them at certain points of the campaign. I don't know. This is up to you as the DM to decide. But when you come across the werewolf, and you don't have any silver weapons or silver bullets or crossbow bolts on your character sheet, you can pull that out and hand that to the DM. And again, Neal, have a flashback to where you were making some sort of preparation in case you came across this type of monster. And maybe you tie that into the knowledge and you have to have a successful knowledge check to be able to use that, because if you didn't know about that as a weakness, well, then you wouldn't be able to use that. And that could make it a little bit harder to get that bane, as it were, whether it's silver bullets or holy water or holy symbol stakes, whatever it is, to fight that certain monster. But that could be a cool other mechanical use for, oh, here you go, DM, take this. Cool. Now you have your sword that you've been using. We didn't talk about it until now, but yes, you had it coated in silver.
It's so good. I like that. And I like the idea of having having the cards, having something easy to carry. Because my other thought was like, oh, you could totally get spent bullet shells. And I was like, no, that's too much of a hassle from so many different perspectives. That's no.
There's so much more we could talk about here. We could talk about like the defenses that monster hunters would have, whether it's different types of armor, magical defenses, oils, prayer. You talk about like even mundane things like salt. When you look at like supernatural elements of stories, like salt is going to be protection. You can talk about bait. Monster hunters might have like different types of blood and capsules on them to like lure in people, maybe different types of incense. Depending on your characters, they might even like be willing to use people as bait. But let's kind of transition into the talk about like making the monsters real. We talked a little bit about this, Neal, but how do you make this type of game feel interesting and new on a basis of, oh, we're instead of like, okay, now you're going to hunt down a vampire. Okay, now you're going to hunt down a ghost. Okay, now you're going to hunt down a troll. How do you make each and every type of hunt feel new and exciting and interesting?
I think what's happening to the world is that first clue. So in a lot of ways, like again, the 5th edition analogy would be, if you wanted a mechanical perspective on it, like what are the like layer actions? What's happening to the environment? So what are happening to the people? Do you go to a town and everyone appears very gaunt and their skin is somewhat gray? They're there and like they're definitely normal townspeople, but are they being haunted? Or if again, like the creature from the Black Lagoon, and they're all taking this water that's now tainted, and so like again, the physical appearance, or is it direct interaction? Like one person has, I mean, this is a little body horror, but again, it's because I started watching the Hansel and Gretel one with Jeremy Renner, also the pinnacle of cinema. I'm
so sorry.
Yeah, the idea that like that someone's infested because they've been cursed by a witch, or someone has turned into a werewolf and livestock is missing and people are missing. I think to make it real, you have to show what's happening to the people in the area of the monster.
Yeah, I think that in a campaign like this, every now and then you're just going to want the straightforward, this monster is evil and we need to kill it. But I think that whole aspect of like either whether it's misunderstood monsters or cursed and infected humans adds a different element to it, because the cursed and infected humans may 100% kill you when given the chance, but is your response going to be just kill them when they try to kill you? Because is there a way to cure them? Is there a way to lift the curse? And if that's the case, like are your PCs going to want to just like decimate them, or is there a more difficult path to try and lift the curse to heal them of their disease? And the misunderstood monster thing, like we said too, like what if there's a troll out there who, when you meet that troll, like it does not seem like this troll is bad, but they are misunderstood, and maybe there's someone else, maybe there's a person that has been killing other people and blaming it on the troll because the troll is an easy scapegoat.
So, you know what time it is.
It's time for homework.
It is.
What do you got for homework?
Watch Van Helsing. Can't tell you anything better than that. I really, truly cannot tell you anything better than the 2004 film with Hugh Jackman and Kate Beckinsale and Faramir, the guy who plays Faramir in Lord of the Rings. He's like this.
Sure.
Yeah.
I don't remember that movie.
Well, I do. I watched it very recently. Again, go into it with the idea that you are literally watching a D&D campaign play out in front of you, and you will be totally fine. You will get a lot
Go
out
on
of
for
it.
Inspiration. Yeah. Speaking of the pinnacle of this is the silver screen, one of the best networks ever, the CW.
Ooh.
Supernatural.
Oh yeah.
Supernatural is great, especially that first season. It very much followed the Monster of the Week model, which you can find in other shows like Fringe. You can get ideas from X-Files. But all of those are great if you are looking to dive into ideas for different monster adversaries to throw into the player's ways. And honestly, most players probably, you could even kind of really just kind of take the stories out of those Monster of the Week episodes. They're all pretty forgettable. Change them a little bit up and throw them as adventures in your campaigns.
Yep. And that reminded me another silver screen one that would do really well, especially when looking into the lore of the monsters and things like that. If you go watch the TV series Sleepy Hollow.
Yep, another, in my opinion, terrible show, but good inspiration. So Monsters of the Week, monster hunting campaigns.
You know what? Thank you, Mitch, for coming on and talking with me about monsters and making me watch Van Helsing.
You know what, Neil? Thank you for coming on the show and talking with me about monster hunting campaigns. Well, I hope that you enjoyed that discussion on monster hunting campaigns. If you'd like to write in and let us know about the spooky campaigns you did over your Halloween time with your D&D group, you can write us an email at dungeonmasterblock@gmail.com. And if you liked this episode, previous episodes, or future episodes of the Dungeon Masters Block, please feel free to leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcatcher app that you use. You can follow us on Twitter at DMS_block, that's at DMsBlock, and you can like our Facebook page. Both of those places will give you great updates about the show, keep you in the loop on what's going on. We have a Patreon member shoutout of the week, and this week's Patreon member shoutout goes to Andrew Black! Andrew Black is a silver dragon. Andrew, thanks so much, you terrifying silver dragon, you, for supporting us, for supporting all the Block Party Podcast Network shows. We truly, truly appreciate it. Well, that's all we have for you for this episode of the Dungeon Masters Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game, the only person capable of playing God, killing characters, and lowering the egos of all other people at the table. I'm your host, Dungeon Master Mitch, reminding you to always keep on dungeon mastering.